Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are focusing on a really critical and I think often oversimplified moment in history. What happens when a new nation loses its founder?
Exactly. We're looking at the immediate, almost brutal fallout from the passing of Muhammad Ali Jinnah.
And specifically the massive leadership vacuum that just consumed the newly formed nation of Pakistan.
Hey, we're not talking about some slow decline, something that happens over decades. We're looking at a flashpoint.
A flashpoint, that's a great way to put it.
It's a moment where a state, which is still basically an infant, loses its singular source of moral gravity, its chief architect, and its entire institutional framework all at once. The collapse, at least according to our source material, was instantaneous.
That idea of an instantaneous collapse is exactly why we need this deep dive. Our analysis today is grounded in the scholarly work of Zaheer Ahmad Meer.
Right. Specifically, excerpts from his book, Quaid-e-Azam of Pakistan,
which is part of his The Next World Superpower series. And for context, for anyone who doesn't know, Quaid-e-Azam means the great leader, and that's the honorific title Jinnah was given.
And Meer, the author, he's a constitutional and corporate lawyer, which is really important here.
Why is that so crucial?
Well, it means he approaches this whole thing with a kind of legal precision. He's not just telling a political story. He's looking at the mechanisms of law and governance and how they failed.
So he kind of bypasses the usual military histories.
He bypasses all of that and focuses on the fundamental failure of the rule of law, the ethical framework. And his core thesis, and this is the really controversial claim we have to grapple with, is that Pakistan's descent wasn't gradual.
Right.
He asserts quite forcefully that the decline, this sort of moral rot and administrative drift, it started the very day Jinnah left.
That is just a staggering way to frame history. I mean, it implies the systemic failure wasn't just inevitable, but that it was triggered instantly.
Instantly. Because of the specific character, or, the lack of character of the people who came next.
Before we jump in, though, I have to ask, why do you think Meer assigns such a definitive cause to that exact date? Isn't state decline usually messy? Dozens of factors.
That's a necessary challenge. Fair question. But the source argues that for a nation in the state, Pakistan was, it's just emerging from the sheer chaos of partition.
Yeah.
There's no settled constitution, no established institutions. The leader wasn't just a figurehead.
He was the institution.
He was the institution. The entire structure was built around Jinnah's personal authority. So if you imagine an arch and you pull the keystone out before the cement has even dried,
the whole thing just collapses.
The collapse is immediate.
Yeah.
So we're really looking at this through the lens of moral and leadership failure. We're analyzing this claim that, lesser men stepped into shoes they were fundamentally unworthy to fill.
And how that one change, that shift in moral leadership, just instantaneously altered the nation's entire trajectory.
Exactly.
Okay, let's accept that premise for our deep dive and see how the source substantiates it. Our mission today is to analyze this material and see exactly how that moral and administrative collapse could so instantly change the fate of a brand new state. So to really understand the depth of this vacuum, we first have to appreciate the sheer, just non-replicable magnitude of what was removed.
Right.
The source makes it crystal clear. Jinnah was far more than just a governor general. When Quaid-e-Azam passed, Pakistan lost its compass.
That metaphor, the compass, it's so profound. It suggests moral and directional clarity, not just, executive power.
It's not just signing bills.
Not at all. He was the singular, non-institutionalized force providing direction, accountability, and an ethical grounding in a situation where all the formal institutions were either weak or contested or just didn't exist yet.
The source makes an almost unbelievable claim here. It says that no nation in modern history was more dependent on a single leader for moral clarity and constitutional order than Pakistan was on Jinnah.
It sounds like hyperbole, doesn't it?
It really does. But then you consider the circumstances of its birth, the chaotic, rushed, violent nature of partition, and that dependence starts to make a terrifying amount of sense.
It absolutely speaks to those unique, frantic conditions. Think about 1947, 1948. The state was literally created in chaos.
Right.
And Jinnah was the one person whose personal authority was just universally acknowledged, respected by the fragmented bureaucracy, by the squabbling politicians, by the new military.
And maybe most importantly, by the millions of displaced people who saw him as the only guarantee of their future.
He was the only unifying element in this landscape that was fractured by geography, by language, by just unimaginable trauma.
And it's not like he was leading some calm, stable state that was setting up its first 5-year plan.
Oh, not at all.
He was actively and simultaneously containing, what, half a dozen massive, overlapping existential crises? The source details these storm elements that just immediately spiraled out of control when he left.
And this isn't just a list of problems. These are 6 simultaneous threats to the state's actual survival.
We should really dedicate the time to appreciate the scale of this pressure cooker he was holding closed.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's start with the administrative challenge. First, you had a divided bureaucracy.
And this was a nightmare. Just an operational governance nightmare. The civil services of British India were suddenly just cleaved in two.
So people had to literally pick a side and move.
Thousands of officials had to relocate. Files were often lost or even deliberately destroyed. Institutional memory just evaporated overnight. And loyalties were completely split.
So the bureaucracy wasn't a stable machine.
Not even close. It was a fragmented, suspicious, and often incompetent collection of individuals trying to figure out which capital to even report to. Jinnah had to personally manage recruitment, deployment, even the basic functioning of every major ministry.
While also making sure these disparate parts actually cooperated.
It's an impossible task.
Okay, so that's one. Then you had the political challenge, the impatient politicians.
Right. And these were men who had sacrificed. They had served under Jinnah, but now they saw the ultimate prize was available.
The top job?
The top job. The source suggests their impatience wasn't just a general thing. It was this hungry, immediate desire to claim their own share of power, to start jockeying for ministerial positions, to redefine their own authority.
And this is all before the state even has a constitution.
Before it has any foundational document, Jinnah's presence kept their ambitions capped. The moment he was gone, that unleashed this internal competition that just completely superseded the national interest.
Okay, third, the external reality. Indian hostility.
This pressure was constant. It was existential. You had border conflicts, the issue of Kashmir immediately flaring up.
The dispute over shared assets, the treasury funds.
Which India initially withheld.
Right.
And you have the constant diplomatic pressure of being this new, potentially vulnerable state right next to a much larger, wealthier neighbor.
So Jinnah had to be the diplomat, the war strategist, and the national morale booster.
All rolled into one, constantly managing the perceived and the real threat from outside.
And on top of all that, the overwhelming social catastrophe, the refugee crisis.
People mention this, but the scale is it's hard to grasp. Millions of people. Estimates range from 7 to 12 million pouring across these new borders.
It's not just a housing problem.
It's a complete societal breakdown. It requires immediate shelter, food, sanitation, healthcare, economic integration for a population the size of many European countries.
And they're all arriving traumatized, often with literally nothing but the clothes on their backs.
And the administrative structure was wholly incapable of handling this. It required Jinnah's personal moral weight to compel action, to mobilize resources, and just to prevent total social disintegration.
Okay, crisis number 5. Severe economic pressure. The economic engine was barely running.
Barely. The creation of Pakistan resulted in a state that lacked any industrial infrastructure. Most of the industry, the banks, the developed ports, they all stayed with India.
So Pakistan was mostly agricultural.
Predominantly agricultural, heavily indebted, and with minimal hard currency reserves. They had to establish trade agreements, stabilize their currency, fund their military, and feed their people, all at the same time.
It's like being the CEO of a company that just lost 90% of its working capital.
And 80% of its machinery. Jinnah was running the whole thing.
Finally, the 6th element, which just makes all the others worse, weak administrative foundations.
The country just hadn't had enough time, a mere 13 months. That's not enough time to build a robust institutional framework.
The high courts, the ministries, an independent central bank.
The revenue collection systems, all of it. Jinnah was running the country using a skeletal framework, often relying on emergency powers and his own personal directives. The stability came from him, from his singularity, not from institutions.
That makes the source's critical realization so clear. Jinnah's personal authority was the singular, almost miraculous gravitational force holding these 6 powerful centrifugal pressures in check.
Absolutely. It wasn't the strength of the new Pakistani parliament, which was barely functioning, or the Supreme Court, which was just finding its feet.
No, it was Jinnah's moral standing.
His non-negotiable discipline and his focus on the singular mission of state survival. He could tell a bureaucrat to work 18 hours a day, and they would do it. He could tell a politician to stop infighting, and they would stop.
Out of respect or fear or both.
A combination of both. So when he left, the system didn't just lose its head.
The whole mechanism holding the structure together just blew apart. The storm wasn't triggered, it was unleashed.
Simultaneously, on a state that was basically built on sand, all 6 crises immediately accelerated because the one figure capable of demanding rigorous discipline, commanding absolute obedience, and unifying those interests was gone.
The moral and administrative capital of the state was drawn entirely from one man.
And when he was withdrawn, the ledger went instantly to zero. The inherent contained chaos just erupted. This is why the source claims the decline began immediately. The problems he was holding back were just released.
So Jinnah departs, and this vacuum forms. The question then becomes, who steps in? And the source is brutally, even painfully frank in assessing the character and competence of the men who followed.
According to Meer, these were fundamentally not the men ready to handle those 6 crises we just detailed.
And we have to analyze their deficiencies, not just list them.
Right. The source suggests these weren't deficiencies of malice, not necessarily, but of fundamental inadequacy for the task. They lacked deep constitutional understanding.
What does that mean exactly?
It means they were unprepared for the technical, meticulous demands of establishing the rule of law, of codifying the state structure.
Okay, I have to challenge this point a little. These were men who were part of the independence movement. They'd served in various legislative roles under the British. Were they truly constitutionally illiterate? Or did they just lack Jinnah's specific legal genius?
That's a fair distinction, but the source suggests it was more than just lacking Jinnah's acumen. It was a lack of appreciation for the urgency and the necessity of the rule of law at that specific moment.
Ah.
Jinnah, the lawyer, understood that the Constitution had to be framed immediately to define the boundaries of power. His successors, the politicians, they saw the law as a secondary issue, something to deal with after they settled their own internal power arrangements.
And that delay, that lack of constitutional focus, was the first big technical mistake.
The first of many. And compounding that technical deficiency was the moral one. They were driven by overwhelming personal ambitions and exhibited weak character.
That combination is just poisonous for a new state.
Absolutely poisonous. Low competence coupled with high ambition and weak character means the focus immediately shifts from public service to self-service. They lacked the one thing Jinnah had in abundance.
Moral authority.
Exactly. Jinnah could demand discipline and sacrifice from people. They could only negotiate based on temporary political strength, which just led to constant factional instability.
And that instability led directly to what the source calls the first fracture. Instead of that disciplined, unified governance, which was Jinnah's non-negotiable style, they immediately engaged in internal conflict.
Instead of facing those 6 massive external and logistical crises as a united front, they started fighting each other.
Unbelievable.
The source highlights that their activities immediately devolved into blaming each other, forming factions based on regional or ideological lines, and just relentlessly competing for power.
It's like a tiny lifeboat in a massive storm, and the crew starts fighting over who gets the steering wheel instead of bailing water.
That is the perfect analogy for the political reality at that time.
So all this internal squabbling meant that resources, energy, and, the nation's political attention were diverted away from nation building.
Completely. Away from the refugee crisis, the economic collapse, and redirected toward self-preservation and political infighting.
And while they were fighting, they were actively neglecting the institutions Jinnah had warned them to strengthen.
Jinnah knew his personal charisma was temporary.
Yeah.
But institutions, the judiciary, the civil service academies, the audit systems, those were meant to be the permanent scaffolding of the state.
But because they were so focused on their faction's victory, they just let the foundations crumble.
They were busy securing power, not cementing legitimacy.
The source identifies this internal weakness, this moral collapse inside the leadership as the first fracture in the dream of Pakistan. Can we explore that a bit more? What does the author mean by first fracture?
The first fracture is the fundamental break between the ideal and the reality. The ideal under Jinnah was a disciplined, meritocratic, unified state.
And the reality.
The reality, immediately after him, was a state governed by ambition, factionalism, and a total lack of accountability. It reframes the cause of Pakistan's struggles. The primary enemy wasn't external hostility, though that was severe.
It was the moral weakness inside the leadership.
Yes, the state was compromised from the top down by character flaws before any external enemy could truly destabilize it.
So the source is really arguing the most devastating blow came from within.
Absolutely. The internal competition for power became the defining activity of the ruling class. It replaced the necessary, unifying goal of establishing a stable state. And when your leaders view the new nation not as this monumental task requiring sacrifice and unity, but as a prize to be won internally.
The entire direction changes
Indeed.
instantly.
And that internal competition bred distrust, suspicion, and ultimately paralyzed governance, which is the exact opposite of what Jinnah had managed to achieve.
Okay, so we've established the political leadership was weak, divided, and frankly obsessed with infighting. Now, what happens when political will collapses?
A vacuum never stays empty.
Power always flows to whoever is organized and steps up. And according to the source, the vacuum after Jinnah was swiftly absorbed by the administrative wing, the permanent bureaucracy.
This is a really critical transition in the source material. We shift our focus to the bureaucrats. Jinnah had very specific, very clear instructions for the civil servants.
He saw them as the backbone of the executive function, but
strictly subservient to the accountable political authority.
he had repeatedly and sternly told them, "You are the servants of the state, not its masters." This was a foundational constitutional boundary he was trying to set.
It was a vital distinction. Politicians, however flawed they might be, are theoretically accountable to the people. They have to face elections. Bureaucrats don't.
By demanding they remain servants, he was trying to ensure democratic accountability stayed paramount.
Yes, but the immediate post-Jinnah reversal was dramatic. Where the politicians faltered because of their constitutional ignorance and their internal fights, the bureaucrats quietly and very efficiently stepped in.
And the source says they stepped in not to serve, but to rule.
This quiet coup by the administration is so insidious because it's almost invisible to the public. It doesn't happen with tanks in the street.
It happens in files and meeting rooms.
Exactly. The bureaucrats controlled the flow of information, they controlled procedural requirement, they controlled the speed of decision-making. So when a weak, divided minister asks for a policy proposal,
The permanent secretary can basically control the outcome.
they can subtly frame the options, delay the execution, or just bury the file if it doesn't align with their interests.
Can you give me a functional example of how this cashing the vacuum worked on the ground? How did it benefit the bureaucrats?
Okay, consider something like an infrastructure project or funding for refugee resettlement. A politician might demand swift, decisive action to fulfill a public promise.
Right.
A bureaucrat focused on maintaining long-term procedural control, or maybe enriching a certain business faction, can just introduce layers of red tape. The file moves slowly. The decision gets delayed for months in consultation.
So the administrative machinery gains power because they become the ones who decide the speed and access.
They are paid to move files. If they control the speed, they control the outcomes. And often, they control access to resources.
And the visible symptoms of this bureaucratic overreach and the lack of political direction were clear across the board, right? The state just started failing to function.
We saw the wheels of government just grinding to a halt. Crucial decisions were delayed because the administrative class no longer feared repercussions from a powerful, unified executive.
Files just sat there.
Files moved slowly, often held up for petty reasons or personal favors, and crucially, policies became confused because there was no singular authoritative political vision to guide implementation. The bureaucracy became the source of policy.
And bureaucrats are trained for procedure, not for vision.
Precisely. A nation that is drifting is a nation that is lost. The source argues this drift was the direct result of the administrative wing taking over the policy-making wing.
The terminology used is so precise. The bureaucracy cashed the vacuum, and Pakistan paid the price.
Cashing the vacuum implies a transactional, self-serving action. They didn't step in purely out of altruism or necessity. They stepped in to assert their own power and interests, benefiting from the chaos the weak politicians created.
So administrative rigidity replaced political flexibility.
Yes, and the systemic damage is profound. When the administrative wing, which is built for execution and procedure, gains undue power over the policy-making wing, which is built for vision and political mandate, the state loses its democratic soul.
The long-term consequence is pretty clear then.
Accountability is diluted and eventually just vanishes. If the people making the effective policy decisions, the bureaucrats, are not the ones who face the electorate, the politicians, the entire democratic structure is fundamentally undermined.
So this moment marks the beginning of the erosion of civilian political authority in favor of unelected, permanent state structures.
An irreversible change in the character of the republic Jinnah envisioned. The politicians had the mandate but lacked the character. The bureaucrats had the structure but lacked the mandate. The structure won.
Okay, so we've established the political fracture and the bureaucratic absorption of power. But the source insists that the most fundamental tragedy wasn't structural or political.
No, it was profoundly ethical.
We need to do a deep dive into the loss of the ethical framework that Jinnah had imposed.
The source is absolutely clear about the non-negotiable standards Jinnah governed by. And these weren't abstract ideals from speeches. They were operational imperatives.
They defined every aspect of early governance.
Strict discipline, rule of law, punctuality, merit, and accountability.
Those 5 pillars describe a rigorous, functional, and fair state. Jinnah himself was legendary for his personal punctuality and precision.
I've read stories that he would famously refuse to wait even a minute past the appointed time for a meeting, no matter who it was.
That rigorous adherence to discipline translates directly into state capacity, doesn't it?
It's the lifeblood of efficient, trustworthy governance. Punctuality means work gets done on time. Rule of law ensures fairness. Accountability prevents abuse. Merit ensures competence. You need all 5, especially in a new state facing 6 simultaneous crises.
But when Jinnah left, this entire rigorous structure, it just evaporated. Immediately, discipline vanished.
And the visible consequences were immediate and demoralizing for anyone who was actually working hard in that nascent government. Meetings were delayed.
The urgency of the refugee crisis or economic planning was just overshadowed by personal convenience.
Exactly. Decisions were postponed, files gathered dust while ministers were busy with their internal factional disputes. The entire government machine slowed down to the pace of personal convenience and political maneuvering.
Instead of the desperate urgency of nation building.
Yes, and the most devastating consequence for the individual citizen and for the moral health of the state was the death of competence. The source just nails it with this chillingly simple line.
Merit died. Favoritism was born.
That simple sentence describes the structural replacement of competence with cronyism. If performance and objective assessment merit are no longer the standard for jobs, for promotions, for contracts,
then personal connections, loyalty to a faction, or outright bribery favoritism take their place.
it becomes the new currency.
Let's elaborate on the destructive power of favoritism in this specific context. If merit dies in the bureaucracy, how does that actually impact, say, the refugee crisis on the ground?
It creates a domino effect of incompetence. If a critical post, like the Director of Refugee Resettlement, is filled by a political ally who knows nothing about logistics or public health instead of the most competent civil servant,
The entire operation just grinds to a halt.
resources are misallocated, food spoils, people die unnecessarily. But beyond that, it completely destroys the morale of the genuinely capable, honest civil servants who realize their hard work and dedication will never be rewarded.
Only political allegiance will be.
So they either quit or they adapt to the corrupt system themselves.
This is where the core argument of the source resides, and it's a powerful one. The author observes, the first tragedy of Pakistan was not economic or military, it was moral.
We need to really understand the depth of that claim. Why is the moral tragedy prioritized over the massive economic or military threats?
Because moral authority and discipline underpin the capacity to address all the other crises.
Exactly. If the moral standards collapse, if the leaders aren't punctual, don't adhere to the rule of law, and prioritize favor over competence, then the state loses its ability to enforce anything.
You lose the ability to efficiently collect taxes, to prosecute corruption, to staff competent departments.
To plan rationally for the future, you become functionally incapable of solving the massive economic and logistical problems you face.
The source delivers the ultimate chilling analysis here. A nation can survive poverty.
History is full of examples of impoverished but disciplined nations that rise quickly. But, the source argues, a nation cannot survive the death of discipline.
That's a powerful statement.
Because poverty is an external manageable condition. The death of discipline is an internal self-inflicted cancer that metastasizes throughout every institution, destroying trust, destroying institutional memory.
So the long-term corrosive effects of low moral authority are inescapable. If the people at the top, the cabinet, the chief secretaries, are not punctual, if they don't follow the rule of law, if they prioritize favoritism,
that culture percolates down to every single layer of society. It justifies institutional negligence at every level, and the public loses all faith in the dream of an equitable state.
the death of discipline, therefore, wasn't just a political tragedy.
It was a foundational spiritual failure. It meant that the blueprint for a disciplined ethical state, the one Jinnah was laboring so hard to install, was discarded before the cement could even dry.
which ensured that every crisis that followed would be met not by competence and unity, but by confusion and self-interest. So we've established how the decline started instantly with this moral and administrative collapse. Now we have to turn to the profound implications of Jinnah's short remaining lifespan.
This is the unavoidable and frankly heartbreaking what-if scenario that really underpins the source's entire argument.
The source introduces this powerful, maybe speculative hypothesis. Had Jinnah lived even one more year, Pakistan's trajectory would have been fundamentally entirely different.
And this isn't just sentimental longing for the founder. This posits that a critical, irreplaceable window of foundational opportunity was missed by just 12 short months.
Why was that 1 year so crucial? What could one man really achieve in 12 months that would fundamentally alter the DNA of a new state?
Because that year would have allowed Jinnah to do one thing: to institutionalize the moral clarity and discipline that he embodied, to make it permanent rather than temporary and personal.
So he would have finished the critical work of setting the structural boundaries of power.
Exactly.
Let's detail the specific foundational acts the source argues Jinnah would have completed, which were lost because of his premature death. These are the 6 irreversible foundations that never materialized.
First, and arguably the most crucial, he would have framed the Constitution.
Explain the ramification of not framing the Constitution immediately. What's the real-world impact of that delay?
Well, when you don't have a supreme foundational document, there is no agreed-upon set of rules. No rules defining who has power, how it's transferred, what the ultimate democratic limits are.
So everyone is just operating in an ad hoc, ambiguous environment.
And that allows simple power struggles to become full-blown constitutional crises. I mean, the subsequent political history of Pakistan is just littered with battles over constitutional ambiguity, power-sharing formulas, the role of the provinces.
All directly enabled by Jinnah's absence and the delay in codifying the rules of the game.
Absolutely. Second, he would have protected institutions from political interference.
This directly counteracts the bureaucratic overreach we were just talking about.
It does. Jinnah would have shielded key state bodies, the judiciary, the public accounts committees, the federal anti-corruption machinery, the central bank, from the very politicians who were focused on their factional warfare.
He would have built a firewall.
By defining their independence constitutionally and structurally, he would have cemented the concept that these organizations served the state, not the ruling party of the day.
Third, he would have shaped responsible political leadership.
This addresses the moral tragedy directly. Jinnah would have used that crucial year to mentor, potentially to purge, or to structure the emerging political class. He was known for his decisive nature.
He wouldn't have tolerated the infighting.
Not for a second. He would have defined roles, demanded discipline, and likely ensured that only men capable of prioritizing merit and unity reached the highest offices, setting a functional standard for democracy from the very start.
Fourth, he would have definitively prevented bureaucratic overreach.
By establishing clear constitutional and institutional checks, maybe a strong audit function, or clear executive rules on how files move, he would have reinforced that boundary. Servants, not masters.
He would have made sure the political, accountable wing of government remained supreme,
halting the insidious rise of the permanent administrative state right at the beginning. Fifth, and this is tied directly to our moral discussion, he would have halted corruption at its birth.
How so?
Corruption thrives in the absence of accountability and discipline. By enforcing merit and transparency immediately, Jinnah would have stopped the favoritism that the source claims was born upon his death. He would have cut the cancer out before it had a chance to metastasize through the entire public service system.
A year of his iron-willed administration would have set a permanent anti-corruption precedent.
It would have become the standard. And finally, sixth, he would have set irreversible foundations for a moral state.
Which really encompasses all the other 5 points.
It does. Creating a culture and a legal framework where discipline, rule of law, and ethical conduct were the permanent, non-negotiable standard for all citizens and leaders, making his personal discipline the state's functional discipline.
These were not minor policy suggestions. These were the building blocks of the state's DNA.
And missing them allowed the weaknesses of his successors, their ambition, their weak character, their lack of constitutional understanding, to become the default setting for the nation's DNA instead.
And this leads to the ultimate conclusion from the source. History does not forgive the absence of great men at critical moments.
Which speaks to this concept of a critical window for nation building.
That window is often incredibly brief, isn't it? especially for a post-colonial state born in violence and economic distress.
Terribly brief. Jinnah's presence held that window open, using his singular moral authority as the framework. His death slammed that window shut. The chance to lock in the constitutional order, the moral discipline, the institutional protections, it was lost, almost instantly.
Which leads the source to conclude that Pakistan's greatest loss was simply the loss of that final critical year of Jinnah's life.
Yeah, and the subsequent tragedy is that the men who followed didn't just fail to be great, they failed to maintain even the simple, rigorous standards of discipline and morality Jinnah had established.
And in doing so, they allowed temporary political squabbles and personal ambition to hijack the monumental, fragile project of statehood.
Creating permanent institutional damage in just a matter of months.
This has been a profound and frankly a pretty painful examination of state failure, concentrated into a single agonizing moment in history.
It really has.
To synthesize our deep dive for you, the listener, the source material argues compellingly that Pakistan's decline began not with a major external conflict or economic collapse or even military coup. It began the moment the nation lost its ethical guardian.
And crucially, it failed the test that immediately followed. Replacing that ethical guardian with men of commensurate character and discipline, the fracture was moral and internal.
And it immediately allowed the permanent administrative machinery to take undue control.
And allowed favoritism to instantly replace merit as the operative principle of governance.
The source frames this not just as history confined to the 1940s, but as a timeless warning. It's a universal observation, really, applicable to any nation at any time.
Nations rise when leaders are principled and disciplined, and they begin their fall when leadership is compromised, putting self-interest above the integrity of the state.
The character of the leader in those critical early moments sets the moral bar for the entire state structure.
And that leads us to the concluding idea for you to contemplate, building on the detailed analysis from the source. Given the specific foundational protections Jinnah was poised to implement, framing the Constitution, protecting institutions, halting corruption, we have to ask, how much faith should we ultimately place in legal frameworks alone?
That's a great question. If Jinnah had managed to finish that constitution, would it have actually held the state together? Laws are just ink on paper, after all.
Exactly. The source suggests that even a perfectly framed constitution is meaningless if the individuals tasked with upholding it, the leaders, the elite bureaucrats, lack the personal character and moral authority required to sacrifice self-interest for the foundational discipline of the state.
It really raises the essential question for any new nation.
In a critical founding moment, is personal integrity and moral strength more indispensable than institutional design? That's something to mull over until our next deep dive.